You're listening to the Business Wealth Impact Podcast, your source for empowering information and cutting-edge ideas from the world's top minds. I'm your host, Jeanne Amlour, founder of seven-figure coaching company, Jeanne Amlour International. Join me on a journey to unleash your potential and create your highest success. Welcome to Business Wealth Impact. Welcome to another fantastic episode of Business Wealth Impact. Today we have Carmen Theobald. Carmen has over 60,000 hours in the art of building bridges between the worlds of horses and humans, and Carmen helps both species create a deeper sense of safety, wholeness, and freedom. Welcome, Carmen.
Thank you so much, John. It's a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. Okay, let's get stuck right into something fascinating, and that is you with horses and leadership. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, so we don't have to be directly with horses to learn how to be a little bit more like them in order to be better humans. And so often I will go into organizations, working with teams, larger groups, to bring some horse sense, if you will, into their place of work. And we can do a little bit of that today on our podcast if you want.
Awesome. I love that horse sense. Okay. So tell us about, I want horse sense. I think we all want some horse sense. So to getting it from the horse's mouth. So what is this framework? I'm fascinated. How does this work?
Sure. Well, we have a few different ones, but our most popular is something called the 5 roles of a master herder, or the 5 roles of like excellent leadership. So it's not about being the master of anyone. It's really about this striving for excellence. And this is a model that came from one of my mentors and teachers, Linda Kohanov, and I then adapted it for both wellness and for work within different communities. And so we're looking at historically and present day, how did people move large groups of herbivores from point A to point B with no fencing, no restraints? And these groups of people, indigenous communities worldwide, throughout time, throughout history, they are all embodying 5 specific roles to be able to make that possible. And it's not that one person has one role and another person has another. It's that we actually have all 5 of these parts, if you will, within us that we know how to keep in balance, to move fluidly through, and to be able to access when we need them most. And so we can learn about that as our human selves, never having any intention necessarily of using them with animals, although if you do, it helps there too. So that as we're leading each other, as we are stepping into different roles at work, at home, personally, professionally, whatever that might be, we have more of an ability to be effective, and really have a wholeness to how we're interacting with one another that can be really, really helpful.
Okay. So how does this come from horses?
Sure. Well, it's nature based and also horse inspired. So, looking at groups of people, whether they're working with horses, whether they're working with cattle, whether they're working with sheep or goats or whatever non predatory animals. So, these herbivores, because they think differently. And so, horses are specifically are what we do the most. We have people actually work directly with horses, all that kind of stuff. But we find that the horse metaphor is very powerful because, unlike, let's say, goats or sheep, horses are very powerful beings. If anyone were to think about a horse and a horse running, that sound of the hooves hitting the ground, these are very powerful animals. They're very muscular, they're very fast, but they're also very vulnerable and they have big, big hearts. They're incredibly sensitive. And this is really where horses stand apart in that their emotional intelligence, their social intelligence, the way that they are picking up on the slightest shifts in our energy, they are so tuned into that and they care about that. And so they offer us this paradox of what it can mean to be both strong and vulnerable, to be both powerful and gentle. So, in order to learn how to work with horses, we need to be able to embody that paradox. And that applies to these 5 roles as well that we can talk about. But we really need that combo of that energy of strength, but also vulnerability.
Okay. So what's this? There's a lot of equine coaching going on right now, and it's about being with the horse as well. So you're saying that you're doing it without the horses present, but you also, don't you have a bunch of horses that you work with?
Yes. So we have a farm in Ontario, Canada. We work with people from all walks of life, but primarily first responders, public safety personnel, military veterans, that kind of thing. And we do a lot of trauma recovery work with them, but we also do a lot of group and team based pieces where organizations who are really focused on wanting to actually change culture, wanting to actually change how things are done at a core level, not just from a poster, They will
Mhm.
come and have experiences where they're getting to live these roles that we're going to talk about actually with the horses. So it's not just about learning, it's about practicing. And no matter
Mm.
what kind of horse work we're doing, there's all kinds of different versions, right? It's like therapy. There's tons of different kinds of therapy. There's tons of different kinds of horse work. But the common thread is that we're actually putting into practice these themes that we're talking about. It's not just about textbook learning. We're actually embodying it and developing muscle mass, if you will, in a different way of relating to one another.
Okay, so what are these things?
Okay, so the 5 roles that I think we can all benefit from bringing in more of or recognizing which roles we're maybe overusing are the following. So the first is the role of awareness. It's called the sentinel. So that's the role of the lookout. So there's going to be both in nature, within animals with no humans, as well as in our master herder examples, where someone is really that sentinel role. They're on the watch for what's going on. They're on the lookout both for threats and opportunities. So that's where we really get stuck sometimes as humans, is that we can really have this hypervigilance. We can have this tuning of our brain only to look for the problems, but learning how to bring in more intentional awareness for the opportunities, for the good things is such an important skill. And so the
Mm.
sentinel is looking at present moment. It's really looking at what's going on from this zoomed out perspective and from a zoomed in perspective. So I start with that because without awareness, we're really struggling. So that's
Mm.
role 1. The second role is the role of the nurturer slash companion. So I'm going to take a moment and just invite your audience and invite you to consider these roles actually in a geographical way. So if we were to consider that there's a herd of horses, let's say, the sentinel, just to backtrack for a moment, would be standing apart. In order to get a good view of the herd, to get that good wide view of what's happening, we have
Mhm.
to be able to have some perspective, which means that we're standing a little bit apart from the herd.
Mm.
So if the herd is like a circle, the sentinel's outside of the circle.
Mhm.
The nurturer companion, the placement of this role is actually inside the circle because that's where we have that connection. So
Mm.
this role is that role of social glue, right? It's
Mm.
that tend and befriend. It's that ability to really create those that energy of support, of caring for one another, really meaning it, right? Being in our
Mhm.
heart. So it's the role of heart connection, if you will. All the roles can have gifts and challenges. They can have strengths and parts that are not so fun, kind of the shadows
Mhm.
of them. So the sentinel, one of the shadows I mentioned, is that hypervigilance, or it can be even this
Mm.
sense of like aloofness. We can have a lot of awareness, but not necessarily have a heart connection to it, right?
Mhm.
And then the nurture companion, the flip side is maybe we're leaning hard into people pleasing. Maybe
Mm.
we are um, having this kind of sense of urgency to connect when it's not really a good time because maybe our awareness is lacking a little bit. Or
Mm.
maybe we're not able to be grounded enough in some healthy boundaries and those kinds of
Mm.
pieces. So we lean on unhealthy forms of power because we feel so uncomfortable with
Mm.
anything other than what seems to be connecting.
Mhm.
So, this nurture companion role is all about creating a sense of comfort,
Mhm.
which doesn't always serve us.
Mhm.
But in its healthiest form, it's really about connection.
Mm.
And so,
Okay.
again, geographically, that's in the herd. The
Mhm.
next role is the leader. So if we were to imagine whether again it's a maybe a leader horse or a
Mhm.
person who's the leader, they would be stepping out in front and leading with this like magnetism and this charisma to really pull people, pull animals, pull whoever forward into the next direction. So the
Mm.
leader has to have a very good vision of where we're going,
Mhm.
has to be able to kind of like see into the future, whether it's like 5 seconds,
Mhm.
5 minutes, 5 years. And
Mm.
that's how we really separate it from the sentinel, because the sentinel is looking at the present, the
Mhm.
leader is looking to the future and stepping
Mm.
out in front to do that.
Mhm.
And that's especially important to think about the location of this role when we think about the fourth one, which is
Mhm.
the role of the dominant. And that one
Mm.
has like this ominous sounding name, but it's really important. We can think of this role as like the direct and protect energy that we
Mm.
all need to have with ourselves and each other, but in
Mhm.
balance, right? We need these in
Mm.
balance. And so if we think about the position of this dominant role, it's someone who's at the back of the herd, pushing from behind. getting it going, moving it forward in that kind of way. And that's really important when we contrast it to the leader, because so often in our society and in our systems, we intertwine who a leader is with who the most dominant person is. And they are actually two distinctly separate roles. And so, if we're thinking about a group of people who's leading these large herbivores with no fencing, no restraints, although they all have these skills, these abilities to do any of the functions, you can't have one person who's leading from the front and simultaneously pushing from behind. It's physically impossible. So, when we translate that into our human world, we need to really be clear about what's what. Are we leading in this moment, or are we pushing from behind? And it's kind of like the difference between being a manager and being a leader, right? Some of those qualities. And then the fifth is the role of the predator. And again, ominous sounding name, but actually really important and beautiful when it's in balance. For example, in nature, you have, this is kind of a hard example, but let's say we're herding a herd of cattle and one of the cows breaks a leg. It is so inhumane and cruel to force that cow to limp along until it dies a slow death. We want to engage this predator role to actually create a permanent ending as an act of kindness. And this doesn't always need to mean an end of life, I hope, but it can mean permanent ending. So boundaries in a relationship, the dominant role, the ending of a relationship, the predator role. So we need to know.
So kind of like when you have to let somebody go from a job.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly what it is.
Right. Okay.
That's exactly.
So this sounds very complex. How do people remember all this? I'm sitting here thinking this is so much to remember. So you train people that
Yes.
all of us have these 5 qualities.
Yes.
And we have to learn to blend and harmonize and balance these 5 qualities in our life and in our work. Yes?
Yes. So 2 things that are going to make it better. One is that we're doing this on a 20-minute episode of a podcast. So there's a ton of information here for people. Normally I would do this in like 4 hours to a full day. But a cheat that we can all integrate right now is not to worry too much about how am I going to figure it all out, but just to kind of think about the 5 roles that I just went through, overview generally, and consider what are the roles that I really feel uncomfortable using.
I would say most people would say the predator because nobody likes firing people.
Yes, I agree that no one likes firing people, but here's the thing. A lot of people who are very strong in the nurture companion will often lean heavier on the predator role because they're avoiding the discomfort of the leader and the dominant. Because when we lead, we're pulling people out of their comfort zone, and the dominant, we're pushing people out of their comfort zone. So it often feels easier, both personally and professionally. We'll see this with people's friendships and family relationships as well as work relationships. We're just going to cut it off instead of doing the hard work that's a little grittier of putting ourselves in the more vulnerable position. A predator moment is short and sweet usually, right? It's not sweet, but it's shorter. It's condensed. Versus the other forms require a lot more vulnerability in how we lean in and also the time frame it might take. So we skip skip a few to get to the predator.
Okay. So it takes a while for people to learn all this, right? And this is derived from horses and the energies of horses, correct?
Horses and nature, right? Looking at how we operate in harmony and relationship to nature and remembering that we're actually part of nature too. And horses are one piece of that. And we bring that in as best as we can. So I have horse videos and we have horse stories that kind of bring this all more to life.
So how did you get from actually working with the horses to this framework, which isn't working with horses?
Yeah.
Separate because you needed to get it to corporate and you can't bring the corporate people to the horses all the time. So you bring the horses to the corporate. Is that what you did?
Basically,
Okay,
yeah.
I'm getting it.
Yes, exactly. I also had some wonderful mentors. That's part of the origins of this work. Linda Kohanov has a wonderful book that she wrote about this. So I was able to have in my training some of this background as well as creating my own to amplify and adapt the work to suit our audiences.
Now, how did you get to this? Tell me, how did you get to this as personally?
Sure. So I grew up in Montreal. And there was a lot of trauma that I was growing up with. And there was quite a traumatic event that took place in Montreal that made me go, okay, that's it. I've had enough of humans. So I left Montreal to go work on a farm that had horses and vegetable gardens and maple syrup production. But it was really the horses that spoke to me. And what I learned through this work with these horses, there were 24 horses at this farm, is that I kept learning about relationship with myself, relationship with others. And they were really my best teachers and healers to work through a lot of the stuff that I was coming from. That opened the door to me becoming a farrier. So I took care of horses' hooves, and I've done that for the last 17 years. So I've worked with thousands of horses now. And about 10, 11 years ago, I kind of got to this point where I was so sure that I never was going to work with humans again. But then I found myself wanting to help other people have these kinds of transformative experiences too.
Mm.
And my background in Montreal before I left was in social services, so I felt like this was the way that I could go back to those roots, but now with these partners that had 4 legs instead of 2.
So where are you now? You're not in Montreal, you're in Ontario.
That's right, that's right. I'm in Ontario, Canada.
And it must have been disappointing for you when you went to the farm and there were some people there that you had to deal with.
Well, I mean, there's people everywhere,
I'm
but not in
joking.
the same kind of capacity as a city. But
There
yes,
were
I
just a
will
few.
prefer animals.
Just you
Yes.
thought, "I just do a few." Okay, so then you got all
Yeah.
ensconced with the horses. Wow, that's fascinating. And
Yes,
then now you own this retreat center with a bunch of horses, right?
that's right.
Fantastic.
That's right.
And then
Yes,
you figured out how to bring the horses to corporate. So that's fascinating.
yes.
And how long does it take a team to incorporate this horse sense?
So this would be a day training.
That's all.
And that's it. Because
Wow.
when we really go through it and you start to parse it out with the stories, with the visuals, and we really go through the strengths and challenges of each role. So it starts
Mm,
to really bring it to life even more.
mhm,
There's so much awareness that we get by looking at it in this way because we really need something to kind of like hang our hat on
mm,
as a way to if someone described it once, it's like they had their clutter drawer that finally got organized. And their
mm,
clutter drawer was their behavior, was their patterns, was how they were showing up in the world and with themselves. And it finally
mm.
got organized. So the same stuff was in there, but now it made sense in this way that it never made sense before.
That's interesting. Okay, and it's one day, and then I guess they have notes, and they're becoming more aware as they work through it. The 5, and okay, that's that, and they're learning how to use them all well.
Yes, I've had people come and tell me many years later, I only did the one training with them. They never came for any additional work, nothing like that.
Mhm,
And I saw them again and they told me that they literally think about it every day. That it's
mm,
something that they see the world, it's like a new lens that they now see the world through that
mhm,
helps them with themselves and also have more compassion for others. Because a big piece of this, no matter which roles we might use more or less of, the reason why we kind of develop muscle mass in these different roles
mhm,
is because of safety, because
mm,
we're trying to find a sense of safety. So recognizing that from the beginning, maybe it's a person who really leans heavily on the dominant role. They got a lot of that like take charge attitude, kind of a
mhm,
controlling nature,
mm,
and they're not balanced with, let's say, the nurture companion. They don't have that heart energy in a healthy enough balance way. And so it's not because they're a bad person. It's because that role helped keep them safe or
mm,
trade that out for any of the 5 roles. So when we know
mm,
that and we have more compassion around it, now we can start to bring in the roles on purpose that maybe we've been avoiding. And that creates the balance. It's not about saying, stop doing the bad behaviors. Although, of course, there's an element of that too, depending on what's going on.
mhm,
We don't need to focus on that too strongly. We need to focus on what can we bring in more of to
mm,
create the balance that we actually need and are looking for.
mm. So, I mean, it would be hard for some people to know how to bring in that stuff because it's saying bring it in. But a
Yes.
lot of people wouldn't know how to bring in more compassion just by saying bring it in, or bring in more
Yes.
predator by saying bring it in. So that's just a framework, but they really have to learn how. Most people
Yes.
just can't say, okay, thanks for letting me know. I got to be more compassionate. How? And how do I be
Absolutely.
more of a leader? How do I be more of a sentinel, more of a
Yes.
not a closer, but, somebody that's a predator.
Yes.
They need do you also help people figure out, like, how to do that?
Yes. And so there's 2 ways. One is actually going through the strengths and challenges because the challenges really help us become aware of maybe where we're out of balance. But the
Mhm,
strengths also give us cues and clues as to what the behaviors are that we maybe want more of. And so
mm,
that starts to really flush it out because sometimes it's not only the how that's confusing, it's also what. Like, I know I
mhm,
need more of this, but I don't really know fully what this is.
mm,
And I know I want more balance, but what is that even? And so again, getting that clarity, getting that awareness through going through these strengths and challenges. And I also invite people to, and people listening can do the same thing. When we see other people performing these roles well, even if we haven't gone through the whole training, if we are in a place of work, let's say, and we see someone offer a moment of training or course correction in a really skillful way, taking note, like allowing the world to be our mentor, allowing the moments, even if it's in a cartoon, right? Oh, wow, that person showed up for this person who's struggling in a way that was kind of very different from what I've seen, but really effective. I wonder what would happen if I tried to implement it here. So allowing ourselves to have this observational quality for the world around us and the people who are really different from us. Because even if we don't like maybe 40%, 80% of their behavior, maybe they're still doing one or two things really well that we can learn from. So really allowing ourselves to keep learning from everybody. And then the second way is that we get to actually go into deeper modes. So I do trainings that really are more workshop oriented for smaller groups. And then the horse work is where we get to really embody it at a visceral level. But I'll say, even for people listening today, like we have a choice in every moment about how we're showing up. Even if we don't know all the next steps, can we intentionally figure out the next right step in order to keep growing?
Right. Well, awesome. Thanks for that, Carmen. Now, before we do end the episode, what's one thing, what's one mindset, one philosophy that you want to leave everybody with?
I would circle back to the piece around what horses offer us to be both strong and vulnerable at the same time. And I would say it that we're so often given as if it's one choice or the other, that we can be strong sometimes and then we can be vulnerable. You know, we can be powerful in certain moments and we can also be gentle in other moments. But in fact, we really need both simultaneously to have this sense of rooted groundedness and the sense of having our heart open with curiosity, that it's okay to show up actually who we are, but not lose our sense of rootedness in this world.
So to show up as our whole beautiful self.
That's it.
That's it. Well, this has been very wonderful. Thank you for joining us. And thank you, everybody, for listening. If you want to help us out, which would be great, why don't you write a 5-star review either on YouTube or Apple or Spotify or wherever you're listening. Take care, and we look forward to seeing you on the next one. You're listening to the Business Wealth Impact Podcast, your source for empowering information and cutting-edge ideas from the world's top minds. I'm your host, Jeanne Amlour, founder of seven-figure coaching company, Jeanne Amlour International. Join me on a journey to unleash your potential and create your highest success. Welcome to Business Wealth Impact.